All right, welcome. Hello? Hello? Check, check, 1, 2. Lights on. There we go. Okay. Welcome one and all to the House Committee on Education. It is Tuesday, March 15th. We got one order of business before we get to it. I'm sure you all received the copies of the minutes from March 2nd, March 8th, and March 9th. If you had a chance to review them, if there are no questions, we'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes. So moved by Stogsdill, second by Representative Murphy. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? All right, motion passes. All right, we're going to jump right in here. Today we have a presentation on the Master Teacher Honorees. So we have a group of teachers here. I'm going to turn it over to Professor Greg Schneider to sort of introduce, and then after we introduce everybody, if there's any questions, I'm sure they'll be happy to answer some. So take it away, sir.
Chairman, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are here to honor the Kansas Master Teachers, as Representative Schreiber said in his resolution before the House. It's from two classes, 2020 and 2022. And we have 10 of the 14 awarded the last 2 years. And so let me just recognize them. And I guess if you had questions for them, we have to go to the other Education Committee and the Senate and do similar things. So let me recognize Justin Heek, 7th grade PE teacher from Dodge City. Erica Huggard, a high school biology and health sciences teacher at Emporia High School in Emporia. Kathy Wagner, a high school English teacher from Hayes, and that's the 2020 class. And we have 2022, Melanie Hammond, a high school chemistry teacher from Salina. Andy Battenfield, a K-5 PE teacher in Emporia. Sarah Hoff, a high school social studies teacher at Dodge City. Karen Stolman Henderson, a math and engineering teacher at Blue Valley Northwest in Overland Park. Gina Johnson, a 4th and 5th grade teacher from Hayes. Barbara Tholen, a journalism advisor and teacher in Lawrence High School. And Brian Scruggs, an instructional coach at Geary County School. I guess we can stand for any questions, or if you have any questions for them. Or
Well, thank you all very much for coming. We appreciate you definitely. Are there any questions for Mr. Schneider or the good folks
One
here?
more thing, Chairman.
Yeah.
We have also the Dean of the Teachers College, Joanne Brewer, behind me.
Welcome.
So thank you.
Welcome. I'll clap for you. That's fine. Well, we thank you for coming. We know you got to get to the far less entertaining and much less fun Senate side of things. So are there any questions for anybody? Representative Schreiber.
I'd ask a question as a teacher. So, and it doesn't matter who gets up, but if you had one recommendation for new teachers, what would it be? Serious answer, but come to the mic, please.
Sarah Hoff, Dodge City. I'm a high school social studies teacher, history and so on. I think that for a first-year teacher, I would definitely recommend an ability to remain flexible and to not take things personally. There's a lot of things going on right now in education, good and bad. And you need to just take what you need to do and go with it, right? You're in your classroom, you're there for your kids. Leave the politics out and do what you're meant to do, right? Like you wanted to be a teacher, that's what you wanted to do. That's all I've ever wanted to do. And so that's what I focus on. Also, wear comfortable shoes. So.
Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So my question is, would it be appropriate to have the honorees stand at the front of the room in front of the flags to get a group picture of them?
Absolutely. Y'all come on up.
Kind of smush in a bit.
Maybe some of the height challenge ones can stand.
Hey, that's not a challenge, that's a gift. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Again. Lovely. Awesome. Good. Everybody got it?
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Some shaking hands and stuff.
Resolution to your various representatives, and I'll get those to you. They weren't printed today, so we approved it, so you'll get a copy of that. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for the distinguished honorees today? All right, without any further questions, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you. Have a blast in the Senate side of things. All right, with that, moving on, today, folks, we have a presentation on Martin Luther King curriculum and celebration. So we are honored, we're going to have Dr. Vern Howard, Chair of Colorado Martin Luther King Commission here. At least I thought we were. Is he on WebEx? Okay, my bad. All right, Mr. Chairman, are you with us, sir?
Yes, sir, I am.
Amazing. Well, the floor is yours, and welcome to the House Committee on Education. We appreciate you coming.
Well, I thank you for having us. I am quite honored to be part of the Kansas State Legislature. You know, the uh, ironic thing is I'm coming to you from Denver, Colorado, and many of you may already know this. Colorado was part of the Kansas Territory. And we ended up naming our capital city after one of your former governors, Denver. And so, ironically, there's a funny story behind that. However, we're not here for that today, and maybe I can share that with you in person one day. What we are here to talk about, though, is something that we need. We need legislative champions. And these champions are people who will champion the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. nonviolent curriculum to be taught all over the country and in our school districts. See, if we look at the past and look at the successes that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had with his peaceful protest, then we will see that in days like today, when we look at all the different issues that have taken place, with all the different violence that has broken out all over the country, when there's been a killing, just or well, I don't know if a killing is ever just. However, it's time for us to teach our youngsters, a new generation, how to do things successfully and peacefully. Let me take you back to January the 30th of 1956. Dr. King was given a speech, and his wife and infant child were at home. And Mrs. King had rocked the baby to sleep. And as she got up to put the baby to bed, she passed by Dr. King's study, his office in their home. It was a little 3-bedroom house. And as you walk down the hall, the first room you came to on the left was Dr. King's study. The second room, which that room was in the front of the house. The next room was the bedroom that Mrs. and Dr. King shared. And the back bedroom was their infant baby's room. And while Dr. King was giving his speech, Mrs. King stopped to turn off the radio and the light in Dr. King's office when there was an explosion. That explosion came from the baby's bedroom. Dr. King, now mind you, they did not have cell phones, fax machines, Twitter, Instagram, or all the other social media platforms we have today. They didn't even have pagers. When the word reached Dr. King, he rushed home, and behind him, there were this angry mob. And this angry mob, they brought bats and guns and other instruments of violence with them. And as Dr. King's house is as the fire is being put out, Dr. King, he stopped in front of the house and he said to the mob, the angry mob, he says, hold on, we don't do things this way. He said, we will do things peacefully. He said, and if we do things peacefully, historians will have to write that there lived a majestic people, a powerful people that instilled a new level of consciousness into a nation. So even in the midst of his wife and child almost being killed, Dr. King stood fast to the principles of nonviolence. As we move on and we fast forward through the civil rights movement, we'll see that every time violence broke out, Dr. King retreated. And he said, that's not how we do things. It was in February of 1968 that Dr. King went to Memphis, Tennessee, when he was supporting the sanitation workers. And once again, as they were marching, there was a riot that broke out. And Dr. King once again retreated and said, we don't do things this way. He went back to Atlanta and he sent forth a bunch of his staff members, his lieutenants, and people who were like-minded and like-hearted to go back to Memphis and to organize a peaceful movement. Well, this time when Dr. King went back or prepared to go back to Memphis in April, he had started receiving multiple death threats, which was nothing new because from December 5th of 1955 up until the time of Dr. King's sacrifice, he had received death threats, an average of about 50 a day. However, this time he had received over 250 death threats, and they were more explicit to what was going to happen and how it was going to happen. It wasn't just random. And even in the midst of these death threats, when Dr. King landed in Memphis, Tennessee, the press came up to him and they said, what about all these death threats? And Dr. King says, I'm not worried about that. And then that evening, when Dr. King gave what I believe was his greatest speech or sermon ever, the mountaintop speech, he said, like anyone, I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not worried about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go to the mountaintop, and he's allowed me to look over, and I've seen the promised land. He says, and I may not get there with you, but I'm here to tell you tonight that we will get to the promised land. Well, as we all know what happened the next day, there was one bullet fired that killed two people. I'm going to repeat that. There was one bullet fired that killed two people. When the bullet hit Dr. King, well, he hit the ground. He was on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. And many of you are probably too young as I look around the room to remember this. However, back in those days, there was a switchboard operator, and you had to pick up the phone and you had to call the operator for the operator to place a call outside of the motel. And they kept picking up the phone trying to call for emergency services. And they weren't able to reach anybody and they couldn't understand why. So at that point in time, Andrew Young ran down the stairs and he got to the office of where the switchboard and the manager was, and there she was dead on the ground. When she heard the gunshot and she looked up and saw Dr. King fall, she died of a massive heart attack. That one bullet killed 2 people. Well, since the 90s, we have seen more and more outbreaks of violence when it came to social protesting. We've seen more outbreaks of more people being hurt because of the violence. This curriculum actually teaches a new generation of how to have a peaceful, social justice, non-violent existence. The trajectory of our young people today, if we don't start teaching them and showing them a better way of doing things, then what's going to happen is we're going to continue to spiral down this ugly atmosphere of hurting more and more people. This isn't a Black thing, a white thing, an Asian thing, a Latina thing. This is a human thing. And it teaches the curriculum to all people equally. So this way, when we have a social protest, when there is something we disagree with, as the First Amendment allows us to exercise that voice, we can do it peacefully without hurting one another. And that's what the curriculum is about. The curriculum is built on 5 principles of nonviolence. And those are the things, right now we are in the season of nonviolence, the 64 days and 64 ways of having nonviolence. It marks the anniversary of when Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated and when Dr. King was assassinated. So from January the 30th to April the 4th is the season of nonviolence. Hence, now is the time for us to come together as a nation and for our lawmakers, champions of legislation, champions of education, champions of justice, to come before with a bill to pass this wonderful legislation for nonviolence to be taught in schools when it comes to social protesting. Mr. Chairman and wonderful, wonderful committee members, I thank you for this time.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. That was amazing. Any questions for Dr. Howard from the committee? Representative Murphy.
I don't have a question, but I applaud you in this movement. And I remember that. I'm old enough. And the idea that we look at character instead of color, I think is something we need to remember and get back to. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Howard, for those moving words. And I also am old enough to remember all those events. In fact, in high school, I thought what I thought was the greatest speech Martin Luther King ever gave was the speech after the Birmingham church bombing. Remember, 4 children were killed.
Absolutely.
And you could forgive anyone for being angry. And they were, but he got up and spoke about nonviolence after that. And that to me was impressive. I think And I want to ask if you feel the same way. It's important that we know today, because we tend to sanitize those times, those of us who didn't live through that, as if everybody was in support of Martin Luther King. And no, they were not. A lot of people were not in support. In fact, maybe half of our country. He was considered a radical. He was considered all kinds of things. Today we honor him. But do you feel that that's important, that we get that point across as well? Because the same thing happens today.
Yes, sir, it's very important. See, here's the thing. Dr. King was a change maker. He was someone who honestly believed in people. He believed in the content of character, as you had mentioned. See, a lot of people tend to, in fact, in 1968, before Dr. King was assassinated, he was considered the most hated man in America, believe it or not. And the thing is Dr. King, he looked at the content of character. And if you look at Dr. King's inner circle and even the people who worked with Dr. King, you'll see that that was exactly who he was. Think about this. Bayard Rustin was Dr. King's public information officer, or communications officer is what they were called back then. He was from the North. He was openly gay and openly communist. Yet Dr. King looked at the content of his character and said, we're running a peaceful movement here. Are you on board? A lot of people don't know this. In order to be part of Dr. King's inner circle and to be part of the team that put the marches together, they literally had to go through beating schools. I'm going to say it again. They had to go through beating schools. They had to learn how to curl up in the fetal position and take kickings and beatings and being spat upon and called horrible things and having horrible things thrown on them. And this is yet the life that Dr. King lived and his inner circle as well. So yes, sir, I do believe it's important that we get back to the content of character and that we get back to unsanitizing exactly who Dr. King, the man himself, was, and yet how he fought for justice for everybody. That's what it was all about. Ladies and gentlemen, I often say, if we respect each other's human rights, we wouldn't need civil rights. See, we're all created the same way. I don't know how many of you remember back when President Reagan was in office, there was a young man who they tried to give a pig's heart to see if a pig's heart would work in a human being. If you remember, he succumbed 3 days later. See, if anyone in that room needs a blood transfusion, needs a kidney transplant, need a heart transplant, other than the artificial intelligence or the artificial ones they're creating today, it's going to take you or I. If I need one, I might need one from you. If you need one, you might need one from me. See, it's a human rights issue that we're dealing with.
Further questions from the committee? Representative Stogsdale.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Howard. I thought that was a powerful presentation. I was in college when Dr. King was assassinated and at Kansas State, and we had the honor and privilege of hearing him speak at K-State that year, that spring. And shortly thereafter, we had the honor and privilege of hearing Bobby Kennedy speak. It was a bad year after that. And but if somebody would have told me that 50 years later we would be dealing with the same issue on a level of violence that is even greater today than it was in 1968, I would have thought that to be impossible. So I think what you're talking about today, the curriculum that you're talking about, I think it's needed even more today than it was back then. and I applaud you for bringing this forward.
Thank you, sir. And again, I agree with you. You know, that was a horrific summer. That was a horrific summer. First, spring and summer. First, we lost Dr. King, then we lost Bobby Kennedy. And we had the Vietnam War going on at the time. We ended up losing more Americans, due to the violence in Vietnam. And not only that, but the violence right here in the United States. The riots that broke out after Dr. King was assassinated, after Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, all of that. Think about it. If that could have been taught back then, how much more we would have been able to avoid it. You know, people, I guess, tend to forget that children are sponges and they learn from what they see. And there's a song, and right now the artist escapes me, but the young man says, "I want to be just like you, Dad. I want to be like you." And he said he's driving down the street and his son wastes his Happy Meal and he utters a profane syllable. And he looks in the back seat and he said, "Son, where did you get that from?" He says, "I got it from you, Dad. I heard you say it." And then that night, when he got ready to go to bed, his son was on his knees saying his prayers. And he said, "Son, where did you learn that?" He says, "I was watching you, Dad. I was watching you." And I share that story because road rage. I use this as an example. Road rage, when children hear their parents yell and scream or throw the bird at somebody who cuts them off in traffic or something of that sort, the kid's mind says, "Oh, so that's how things should be done." Well, that's how this curriculum is. Let's instill this curriculum of nonviolence, of love, of peace, of harmony into our youth, so then they can start teaching. Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, or when the situation took place with George Floyd, and so forth, so on. We can get past that, and we can do it with one generation.
Well, thank you, Doctor, for that. It was Rodney Atkins is the name of the artist, by the way, that came out with that song, and it's a great tune. Question for Doctor, good Lord, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Howard. This is a difficult question, but you've obviously spent, I would assume, a lifetime studying the work of Dr. Martin Luther King. What do you think Dr. King would have thought of the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black Lives Matter concept?
I believe that there wouldn't have had to been a movement if Dr. King was alive, because Dr. King, being the change maker that he was, Dr. King was very articulated, and he was able to actually work and talk with people, and a lot of things that took place would have honestly not had to happen if Dr. King were alive. However, to answer your question, he would believe in the movement, sir, because the thing is if you remember that in Montgomery, when Dr. King first got involved with the Montgomery Improvement Association, the MIA, it was because the Black sanitation workers were not being treated fairly. We lost a sanitation worker because he had sat down on the back of a trash truck to eat his lunch, when somehow or another the mechanism was thrown and he was sucked into the truck and murdered or killed. He was killed. The sanitation workers were not receiving medical or a decent salary. They had no place to change their clothes, so they were taking the sanitation. And for those of you who remember, or are old enough to remember, and I don't believe any of us in this room are, back then there weren't throwaway diapers. there were diapers, and the waste from those diapers was actually put in pails, and those pails were thrown in the trash if you didn't have inside plumbing where it was washed down the toilet. This is the type of stuff the sanitation workers were taking home. So, Representative Sanders, Dr. King would believe in the Black Lives Matter movement, because when we don't look at each life as if it matters, then no life matters.
All right.
Thank you.
This is Chairman Hubert. I just got back from my my testimony for another bill, but I appreciate you sharing. We have somebody else, Dr. Devin DeLaughter, that's speaking, and I will tell you that I first heard about this curriculum last year, and had a chance to look at it, and instead of proposing legislation, I sent it to the Department of Education to ask them to review it and to see if it lined up with our standards. And they gave me a thumbs up. They said it did line up and that they felt like it did meet our standards and would be, an acceptable class to be taught in the state of Kansas. And so even with this hearing today, it was my goal, there have been a lot of questions about race in our country and in our state. And I know that the creators of this legislation are not trying to compete with any movements. They're simply putting forth the beliefs, the practices, and the nonviolent protests that he stood for. And I believe that this is a good way of dealing with race issues. I went to a BLM protest rally just a little bit before I heard about this testimony and was asked about the movement. And I said the gold standard in how we deal with race issues is Martin Luther King. And I would hope that for those who chose to deal with things other than in a nonviolent way, they would look at how Dr. King succeeded and to model that. I believe that this legislation, this curriculum is a great alternative for school boards to embrace and teach right now, to teach race issues, because a lot of people who, when you challenge the Black Lives movement, they say you don't want to teach race. And I don't believe that anybody believes that. But I believe if you don't believe if something lines up with what you believe, it's good to have an option. I believe this curriculum is a better option for dealing with race and to teach our kids what we want them to learn in order to even deal with what Dr. Howard said, that if we would have dealt with it then properly, we wouldn't be where we're at today. But now it's time to move forward, and this curriculum has been reviewed, and it is my goal, even with this hearing, for you to learn more about it and to help the School Board Association to help promote it in a way that I think is productive. With that, I'm going to get into our next conferee, Dr. Devin DeLaughter. Welcome to the committee, and thank you for being here to share.
Thank you for allowing me to come, Mr. Chairman and committee. Before I talk a little bit more specifically about the curriculum, I wanted to first say thank you. This has been a labor of love as we have developed this curriculum on a number of different levels. And so the support that your state has already shown for this curriculum does not go unnoticed. And I just wanted to, on behalf of all of us who are working tirelessly to bring this project to fruition, just to say thank you. So one of the things that I wanted to commend you guys for is the fact that you recognize your Teachers of the Year means a lot. As a lifelong classroom teacher, to know that the people who make decisions about how you're able to do your job and to affect the lives of the kids in your communities and in your state are seen and heard and appreciated means a lot. And so what I wanted to do is just to take just a few minutes to talk specifically about what this curriculum looks like in the hands of a classroom teacher, right? So going back to what we discussed earlier with Dr. Howard, there are a number of issues and concerns around a number of different topics socially in our community right now. And we feel like this particular curriculum helps us do two very important things. One, it helps to bring the attention to our students, the next generation, which we hope builds a level of empathy for them, to the people in their community, their state, and then around the world. And the other thing is, one of the things that all teachers around the country want to do, and I know in the great state of Kansas this is true as well, we all want to instill the sense of wonder in our students. We want our students to leave our schools and our communities excited about learning, inquisitive about the world around them, and active, engaged participants and citizens in that process. And so this particular curriculum allows students to imagine, what would today look like if Dr. King were still alive, right? If Dr. King had at his disposal all of the social media platforms and all of the connectivity that we have across the world, how much more broadly could he have shared his message and brought the world, this community, the state of Kansas together with those ideas that Dr. Howard mentioned, those 5 pillars of the curriculum, of the base of his message throughout his tenure in the civil rights movement, from freedom and perseverance to consciousness, justice, and hope, allowing students through a very structured curriculum to gain a better understanding and use the tools that are at their disposal to be able to affect change in their community, in their state, and around the world. So in the hands of a classroom teacher, one of the things that I wanted, as you guys champion this curriculum across the state, to note is this is a one-stop shop curriculum. For any teacher in the state of Kansas who adopts this curriculum, it can be taught as a standalone semester-long course for either 9th grade or 6th grade. It can also be taught as an add-on to an addition to an existing course, whether it be a history course, a social studies course, any of your reading intensive courses, because there are aspects of the curriculum that can be pulled out and used in conjunction with some of the things that your teachers have at their disposal already. One of the things that allows us to do that is the open source resources that are available within this curriculum. So literally anyone in that room right now could pick up this curriculum and follow it step by step with every resource or tool that they needed to guide conversation, to help kids understand what the curriculum is intended to do. And at its core, this is a case study curriculum. So what we want to do with our students is we want them to understand this Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was developed by Eleanor Roosevelt after World War II, that was championed throughout the civil rights movement by Dr. King. And we want them to come to their own conclusions about the particular rights of the 31 that they're most passionate about. And what we want to do is we want to bring to their understanding other people, both now and in the past, who have championed some of those particular rights that are their age, that did it in a time where they didn't have access to social media. Today, we have high school students who have millions of followers around the world for a number of different things. Imagine a student in your state who says, I believe, as Eleanor Roosevelt laid out in the Declaration of Human Rights, that every child across the world is entitled to a high quality education. And so they decided to use their platform on social media to advocate on behalf of those people who couldn't advocate on behalf of themselves, to make sure that that right became a reality for any student. To give you an example, Dr. Howard mentioned his favorite Dr. King speech. I actually have not only written the 6th grade version of this curriculum, and I'm happy to answer questions about that when we finish, but also have had an opportunity to teach both the 6th grade and the high school curriculum in a number of different settings, both in public school setting as well as a private school setting. And one of my favorite activities within this curriculum is in the Hope unit. I ask our students to reimagine the I Have a Dream speech using the medium of TikTok. So if any of you have grandkids or high school kids or college age kids, TikTok is one of the fastest growing social media platforms used in the world today. And it has a reach that reaches far, far beyond what Dr. King would have had access to back when he gave his speech. But imagine if Dr. King would have been able to use that medium to present that material and that vision and that hope-filled message to the world. And now we have kids who are creative and that are passionate and empathetic towards the plight of themselves and the people around them, that they can use these mediums in a meaningful way to affect change and to grow the opportunities for people around them throughout the world. And so any teacher in the state of Kansas who would desire to use this curriculum, since you guys have already approved it, could, as I mentioned, take this course as a standalone course for a semester. We've had teachers offer after-school programs where they went through various aspects of the curriculum with students who volunteered to come. We've had history or social studies teachers take one or two of the units and use those within the curriculum. Within the curriculum, it gives you a bell-to-bell classroom instructional breakdown using some of the latest technology and research on classroom instruction and classroom management to help kids engage. There's a lot of writing and a lot of reading, but in addition to that, this is a portfolio model curriculum where at the end of the unit or the end of the curriculum, kids take away an artifact that they can take with them, whether it be a social media platform portfolio or it's a hard copy that they can use and build upon moving forward, regardless of how much or how little of the curriculum that they're able to be exposed to. So we're excited about the possibilities of helping our students not only manage technology in their lives, as this generation is one of the first to be born into a world where technology usage on a personal level has been normalized, but also use those things to grow and to help the world understand that the things that Dr. King wanted for all of us, the things that he espoused, that we all understand and cherish today, can be championed and broadened by this next generation using a lot more sophisticated platforms than any of the generations before them have ever had. And our hope and our goal is, again, as I mentioned, is that they develop a sense of empathy for themselves, for their communities, for their state, and for the world, and be able to be equipped to move forward to make change, as Dr. King so famously told us so many years ago. So thank you again for the opportunity. Thank you for championing the curriculum, and I'm happy to, on behalf of the practitioner side of the curriculum, share any ideas or thoughts or answer any questions about what this might look like in the hands of a teacher or school district or principal in any of your communities in Kansas.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, we do appreciate my goal again, and I do appreciate the Kansas Association of School Boards is tweeting as we speak in regards to help getting the message out to local school boards where the decision to use this curriculum is made. That was my goal in having this hearing, my goal for my committee to get a chance to hear about it and to help promote it also and to ask questions. I do appreciate you guys taking the time to speak to this committee and answer questions, and we will work together to get the information on how we want these types of race issues taught in our schools and to our kids, because I do believe when we talk about transparency, accountability, parent rights, this is the way to do it in a way parents are going to be agreeable to and support and work together to do it in the right way. Thank you, committee, for your questions and input. And again, thank you to the presenters for sharing today. With that, we will close this presentation on Martin Luther King curriculum. And before we wrap up today, we are going to work to pass out House Bill 2631, which we had discussion on last week. And we have gotten feedback from different people, and I did talk again with the Department of Education, and they have provided input in regards to the balloon language we looked at last week, and I asked them to help flesh out who would be in the pilot program, and they sent me an additional 19 schools to add to the list that was originally provided. I'm going to let Jason explain where we are with the balloon, and then we will open it up to questions and entertain a motion to adopt the balloon language that is going to be passed out right now. While they're handing it out, again, my goal in thinking that this was a good idea, but I didn't feel like we could get it passed as written because of concerns with cost, and I felt like a pilot program would help us to gather data and to hopefully do it better next year. But to get the nut of the bill started right now in the pilot program. And so I have gotten some commitment from leadership that in doing it this way, that I could hopefully get it put into proviso language, just like we did with the computing science bill. So I'm gonna let Jason give an explanation of the balloon language, and then we'll open it up to questions for Jason.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, if you recall, House Bill 2631 is the bill that would provide additional career technical education state aid to school districts on the basis of students enrolled in those districts completing and obtaining a industry recognized career technical education credential. The rate of reimbursement under the bill as introduced will be 120% of the cost of the assessment to obtain that credential. And then there were provisions for that to be amount to be certified by the State Board of Education and transferred into the school district's Career Technical Education Fund. Under the balloon that was just passed out, the balloon would do about 4 different things. First of all, it would narrow the scope of the credentials for which school districts would receive state aid. It would create 2 tiers for those credentials. The first tier would be high value credentials that are identified and approved by the State Board of Education after consultation with the Secretaries of Labor and Commerce and with representatives of industries that recognize career technical education credentials. These high value credentials would be state aid would be provided for students who obtain these credentials at the rate of 120% of the cost of the assessment. There would also be a second tier of standard career technical education credentials, again, those that are identified and approved by the State Board of Education. These would be credentials that if obtained by a student who has an IEP or 504 plan, would entitle the school district to receive state aid at a rate of 100% of the cost of the assessment. The bill does eliminate the direct funding provisions for direct transfers, and so this would be subject to appropriation authority under the general appropriation to the State Department of Education to distribute these funds. There's an amendment on page 2 that the funds that are received by the school district and deposited in the school district CTE fund must first be spent for the cost of the assessments of those credentials for which they have been compensated for. And then finally, a new subsection E limits the term school district, so that creates this as a pilot program. And so this state aid would only be available to those school districts that are listed there in that new subsection E. There are 39 school districts there, ranging in various size and representing a fairly broad geographic scope of the state.
Thank you for that explanation. Before we get into questions and discussion of the language, I would at this time entertain a motion to pass out and amend the bill with the balloon language that's been presented.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I move that the committee pass out House Bill 2631 favorably.
Okay, we'll go ahead and do that first before we get into the amendment. We have a second from Representative Stogstill. Discussion from the committee. All those in favor, signify. Wait.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Put it on and now we can adopt it. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all I thought you were going to do initially, but yeah. Go ahead. Proceed. Well, yeah.
Trying to think.
You didn't, yeah.
So
you didn't move
so I will move the amendment
Okay.
first.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a motion to amend 2631 with this amended balloon language. Do we have a second on the motion? Representative Stogg still seconds. All right, now we're open for discussion. Sorry about that. Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The standard, let's see, what's the term we use for the high value credential and a standard credential? And then it's stated that the standard credential would only go to students with an IEP or a 504 plan. It seems like when we talked about that, we were talking also about kids who would not necessarily have those, but would need that standard value. Am I reading this incorrectly? But it seems to me that's only limited to the IEP and 504 kids.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that's correct. The amendment would only provide state aid for school districts for standard CTE credentials that were obtained by students who have an IEP or a 504 plan. Students who do not meet that criteria but obtain those credentials would not be calculated in the amount of state aid the school district is receiving.
Well, and that's what I thought that read, and did I misunderstand? But I thought when we talked with the people here, we were including, there would be kids who maybe just have an IPS, but would be included in that as well, who might not be able to do the high value, but could do the standard, and it would be beneficial.
I think we could have that discussion in tweaking that language in the way you just said, because I do see value in that. And I'll leave it to the wisdom of the committee as far as, I guess we could, we need a substitute motion or just for you to tweak that language in the way that he is. Okay. We'll look at working, passing this, and then we can look at making that tweak after we do this. Okay. Further questions, Representative Poskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of the school districts, have these school districts been consulted and agreed to participate? And if they choose not to, is there a way to substitute one of the districts with another one?
This bill doesn't provide that language. I do believe that, and again, John Hess is here from the department, Stacy couldn't be here, but I do believe these districts that have been presented to us in addition to what was originally presented, and I know she was reaching out and speaking to districts when she put together the list. So I do believe from the original list and the additional list that the districts were agreeable to participating. But there's nothing in this list that would allow for a change in that. If a district decided not to participate, there would just be one less that would be in the pilot, and that'd be okay too. Further questions from the committee? Seeing none, would you like to close on your motion?
I close on the amendment.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. Representative Schmidt, we would let you entertain your tweaking language.
Well, I've been trying to think how we word that, but I think if we include something to the effect that IEP 504 or other students as determined by school administration or something of that nature, if we did it some way like that, does that make sense?
We'll see if my revisor is following what you're saying, because he's the one that has to take your conceptual idea and put it into language that, and Representative Thomas, did you have a thought on that or a question?
Are you referring to section 2 where it says by student who has an individualized education program or a 504 plan, and then just adding that language in there that includes other students as determined by the district?
Yes, that's kind of what I was thinking, and that opens it up a little bit to those kids in.
Okay. I'm looking at my revisor as far as, you know, do you feel like you could word that in a way that will meet the input that you've been given so far? And I don't see a reason why we couldn't open it up a little bit more, but.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the wording would be just added on as additional category. And under that amendment, then any student who has an IEP or 504 plan would definitely qualify, and the district would get state aid based on those students. And then the school district would get additional state aid based on any other students the district had identified and reported to the state board, if you leave it to local school district discretion.
Okay, I think we're agreeable. Representative Sanders, did you have a thought on that?
Yes,
or input?
I agree with what Representative Schmidt is saying in principle, but I think a better word would be the word the reviser used, at the discretion, rather than not as determined. And that's, I mean, I'm splitting hairs here and I know that, but.
There's a difference from kind of approving it without discretion.
Yeah, but I would ask Representative Schmidt to maybe use the word discretion rather than determined, at the discretion of the.
And the reviser is writing as we speak, and so we'll let him finish his thoughts. Representative Schreiber, did you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we have to include that phrase about who's included and who's not? Why not just say that, you know, if they get a standard career technical education credential, they just get the one times state aid or whatever. I can't remember what. Yeah. So the 1.2.
Do you have a comment on his question, or, you know?
I might be misunderstanding it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, as currently worded, the limitation also limits the amount of state aid that would be paid out to these pilot programs. If you removed any student categorization so that any student who obtained a standard credential is counted in the state aid, that would increase the amount of state aid payments that these school districts would receive, because you are no longer restricting the number of students who are eligible for the state aid. Does that make sense?
And with the pilot program, you know, we're trying to word this in a way where we're giving flexibility, but we're also gathering data on how successful it is and how maybe it could be done better in the future. But I know as we looked at the original language and how we could amend it to try to open it up some, provide clarification in order to have the best possible language, I think we're getting closer to what we wanted to get to. Representative Schreiber, you have an additional thought?
I guess I kind of understand it, but we make the distinction for standard credentials, but for the high value ones, we don't limit it to just a certain group of students. So I'm kind of confused about why one and not the other. But
okay.
I'm not necessarily opposed to the way it's written. I'm just confused on why the standard credentials have a restriction on the types of students that can earn those and get state aid as opposed to the high value.
Okay.
Thank you.
Representative Estes, I think you're online. I think I heard your voice earlier. Did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to comment on this conversation. I think for the low value certificates, the thought process was there are some students with special needs, and that was why that was tailored for them there. And in my mind, for students who don't fall into those categories, I would like to make sure we're looking at something that's higher value for certificate if we're going to pay for it. And I'm not going to make an amendment at this time, since this is a pilot. But I think at some point, if this does move forward, we need to make sure that there's a financial need for this. Maybe something like the student being on free and reduced lunch. But for the sake of a pilot being able to be conducted, I'm not going to add that at this time, but I think it's something that we should think about.
Thank you, Representative Estes. Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Representative Estes. I'm looking at my notes from the other day, and I remember them saying there was a problem with having too many explorers and not enough completers. And so it seems like it's the best use of our tax dollars if we're getting completers, and explorers can be on their own dime.
That's kind of what Stacy was telling me too, and why he was helping to provide some language to help us to tweak this. John Hess, do you have any, I know this isn't your, you're not the expert, but I know you've spoken with Stacy. Do you have any thoughts with where we're at right now before we finalize things on?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, John Hess, the Director of Fiscal Services for the State Department of Education. If I'm understanding the intent of the conceptual amendment, it is to allow school districts at their, what is the word? Discretion?
Yes.
Discretion to add students who are available for the 504 for reimbursement at 100% for regular credentials. I guess just, and I don't want to, I want to say this is my perspective only, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the State Department of Education in this case. There doesn't seem to be criteria for who that would be, like what criteria are school districts going to be exercising for that discretion. That kind of leaves it up to the local school boards to do whatever they want. And maybe that's the desire to do so, but that could then expand faster maybe than the committee expand the pilot faster than maybe the committee intends. I don't know. That is a policy decision left to you, but the way I'm seeing it, that is how I'm interpreting the conceptual amendment, and maybe I am wrong, but that's kind of how I see it.
Originally, I was kind of thinking along your lines, and I don't want to get bogged down in the language. I want to get a pilot pass that we can gather data, and also get credentials to kids who need them. But I wanted the committee to have the flexibility to have a discussion, and this is an amendment subject to the committee voting on it. I don't want it to get out of control. I do want to, I know in speaking with you, you felt like even with the addition of the districts that we would be able to keep the cost under the, the $1 million that was proposed to be a part of the proviso language that I was going to seek. And again, I don't want to blow it out of the water with language that might cause that to get too large. So does anybody in the committee have questions in regards to what John said? And, because we are going to be voting on this, and I'm kind of going to leave it to the will of the body, but the committee. First I had senators and then Representative Stockstill.
So as I've heard this discussion, thank you, Mr. Chairman, I think Representative Schmidt's heart is in the right place. But since this is a pilot, maybe we should just leave it as is. And then if there needs to be an expansion of it down the road. So now I want to withdraw my previous comment because I'm agreeing with Representative Featherstone and with the
that was my thinking too.
Been presented. I think maybe since it is only a pilot, we ought to just leave it be.
Okay, Representative Stockstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very supportive of this bill. I just want to make sure that we're using the proper definitions of who determines who are in these programs, and I think I heard school administration, but I just wanted to make sure that teachers were involved with that, and I don't think you meant to exclude them in any way, shape, or form, but I think it's important that we emphasize that teachers are a part of that decision-making process.
I don't think this language would stop that. It's a part of the process. But Representative Schmidt, I think we've had a good discussion. Do you?
Let me just add, and first of all, yeah, if we say at the discretion of the school district, and that's whoever would be determined there. But I understand what the representative is saying here, but I think there is that people who are in schools, and the school people mentioned that to us. There's that level of kids who are not IEP, not 504s, but who would not be able to do a high value credential. but would benefit from the other kind. Now, we're talking relative peanuts here. These are $50, $100. I don't think we're going to go, and we've got a limited number of school districts. I don't think we're going to go over budget. So, I mean, I'm not opposed to what Representative Sanders said, but I still do think we need to take that group of kids into account.
Okay, I think we've had a good discussion. That sounded like a good close. We've heard both sides of the argument on this change. So I'm going to go ahead and, do you want to read off what your language was written down as before we?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the conceptual motion to amend paragraph 2 on page 2 of the Balloon Amendment would be that the credential is obtained by a student who has an individualized education program, IEP, a 504 plan, or, a 504 plan at the time the credential is obtained, comma, or as other student identified as obtaining a standard credential as determined in the discretion of the school district.
Okay, you've heard that language, and I'll let Representative Schmidt, if you want to close on your motion.
Yes, I would propose that we add this language to it.
And we needed a second also before Representative Hoskins seconds, so I'll let him go ahead and close.
I closed my discussion. I think this is a good bill, and I think adding this is another level of assistance that we need to take into account. Thank you.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Sound like the nays had it? Division's been out, us for. With ayes, please raise your hand. Seven, aye. Keep your hands up. 8. Okay, opposed? I don't know, we'll ask her in a second. Opposed? 1, 2. Okay. 3, 4. Yeah, she is. With Herbie. Okay. The ayes have it. All right. Committee, I appreciate all your input, and this has been good discussion. Again, the pilot will allow this issue to be looked at again. I know. I'm hoping that we're ready to get to the point of passing it out. But, this will be looked at again as all pilots, just to work it in the future. We gather data and we get this process started. You want to go ahead and make the motion to pass it out as amended?
Yeah, before I close, I just want to say that this is a pilot program, and I think, as we've discussed, I think changes can be made over time once this passes. So I agree with the chairman. We don't want to water this down too much. I think it's a good bill, it's a good program, and I think over time we could certainly continue to make changes to it. And with that, I close.
You need to make the motion to pass it out as amended.
Oh, I make the motion that we pass House Bill 2631 out of committee as amended.
All right, do we have a second? Schmidt seconds. Further discussion? He closes. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, committee. We are done for the day. Tomorrow, we have another hearing, and then we're have a presentation from the Department of Education related to a bill that we kicked out last year but got vetoed. And I thought it was important tomorrow to have a chance before the session wrapped up to have that discussion on something that didn't become law, but still there's a need, and to see what's happened since, that veto in regards to meeting some of the needs that were put into legislation. So be prepared for a quick hearing. We have just a couple people testifying, no opponents. We probably, I think we'll be able to work it tomorrow unless, there's objection. I never will work a bill if there's objection on the same day. But I do believe there's a chance we can do that tomorrow. But if not, we can come back on Thursday. Yeah, but again, we'll have that briefing and discussion with the Department of Education, and then we'll also have that, what's the bill number for the bill tomorrow? 215. So with that, committee, we are adjourned, and we'll have, meet back here again